Hi, everyone. All right, I think we're going to get started. So welcome everybody to the Barnes & Noble Book Club discussion. My name is Mackenzie Newcomb and I am the founder of Bad Bitch Book Club. We are a free virtual book club that meets several times a month to discuss books across a variety of genres. And I am so pleased to be with Miranda Cowley Heller, the author of what is undoubtedly the book of the summer, instant New York Times bestseller, and Barnes & Noble Book Club pick, The Paper Palace, which I have with me here today. Miranda Cowley Heller has worked as Senior Vice President and Head of Drama Series at HBO, developing and overseeing shows such as The Sopranos, which is my favorite show, 6 Feet Under, The Wire, Deadwood, and Big Love, among others. This is her first novel. She grew up spending summers on Cape Cod, as I'm sure many of you have gathered by reading this book, and now lives in California. So welcome, Miranda.
Thank you, and thank you, Mackenzie. It's so exciting, and obviously Barnes & Noble, I'm so honored to have been chosen as your book club pick. It was amazing to find that out, and this has been such an incredible run and so much fun, and I can't wait to discuss it with everybody.
Every time I've gone to my Barnes & Noble this month, there's been like one or two of these left. Like they're flying off the shelves. So congratulations on your huge success. I'm sure you're really proud.
I'm amazed and completely thrilled, of course, since it's my first book. It's like a dream come true, obviously. So,
yeah. Well, I just want to remind you all that we'd love to hear your questions that you have for Miranda. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and hopefully we can get to them later. But without further ado, I'm going to get started on some questions that I have for Miranda. So my first question. The center of the story is a woman who has to make a life-changing decision. What drew you to this idea?
I think I've always been fascinated by the sort of twists and turns and the notions of choice, the choices we make that determine our lives, and also the choices that we inherit. And I think Elle is a character who is at a crux. She wakes up at this insane kind of crossroads where she has 24 hours to make a decision, an impossible decision that will determine the rest of her life. And what I felt was really interesting in Elle is that what you learn through the course of the novel is that these are two different but really powerful loves, equal in their ways. And that for Elle, it's a choice between these things that are both pulling at her, and there's no bad choice, and that means that there's no good choice. And so what do you do? What questions do you ask yourself to determine your future in that case? Can you live with regret? Can you not? Can you live beyond the sort of moral imperatives that are put on us, and so on? And I think that's what she's kind of struggling with, and that's what really interested me.
I think as a reader, it was impossible to decide what you thought was the right choice for her as well. You're like, well, this is, you have to, but you also have to do this. Like it really, you're pulled so strongly in either direction that you're really able to put yourself in her character, which I know a lot of people have issues with infidelity and even in books. But this is one of those instances that really shows you how someone can be put in a position that is truly impossible. So I really loved that about this book.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that interested me so much about the male characters is that they each in their own way hold this, they are equal. There's not one obvious choice ever. And in fact, I didn't decide who she was going to choose until the very last couple of pages. I just sort of followed her lead, and that was really a fun journey to follow because she just, to me, I love her. She's so interesting and damaged but strong, such a strong female character, and obviously in her early 50s, and but sexy and real, and that's what I wanted, was sort of the verisimilitude of a woman and her life, with and to try to get away from the oh, she's been unfaithful piece. You understand the love, you understand what she's been through, what she's been put through.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And it's almost left like a little ambiguous at the end. You're like, I think that that's what she chose, but did she like, I love Elle. So this book takes place in Cape Cod. What made you want to set the book there? And by the way, I grew up going to Cape Cod. I'm from the South Shore of Massachusetts. So I don't know if they knew that when they asked me to moderate this, but I was like, that's really on point. So I'd love to know what is it about Cape Cod that made you want to set the book there? And what is it about summer that makes it so evocative? I read this on a overcast day in Martha's Vineyard, so the vibes were really immaculate.
Well, actually, I am on Cape Cod right now. It's a very overcast day, and I'm looking out the water. I think for me, I grew up on the Cape, spending every summer here, and both my parents are artists, so we could spend the entire summer. And when a lot of people think about the Cape, they imagine the Cape, I believe, as a sort of the Kennedy compound, sailboats and green lawns and inlets. But the further out you go, and you probably know this, the more wild the landscape becomes. And where I grew up in the backwoods, and where the novel is set, and where Elle grows up, it's a very powerful and quite romantic, sort of Bronte-esque landscape. And it's crashing waves, very, very high dunes, forests that run up to the dunes, and then all these freshwater ponds. It's mysterious. It's all dirt roads. And growing up, I just ran around untethered. And the idea of how this place imprinted on me and made me who I am, I wanted that for Elle. I wanted that place, kind of a place for her. And also, to me, the backwoods is one of the characters in the novel, I think. And to that point about sort of summer and heat, I think the place in its entirety, including the weather, including the hottest sex is under the hottest sun, the inner turmoil is during a storm, and so without being too on the nose, I think the landscape itself completely infuses her life and grounds her and shapes who she is.
Absolutely does not, and I fully understand. I live on a freshwater pond in the South Shore, so I definitely able to really picture everything. So this novel takes place over 24 hours and also over the course of 50 years, as the story of Elle's is told in small amounts. Why did you choose to tell the story this way?
Well, so to the point that I was making earlier about understanding and infidelity and choice, I think our lives are made up of, a million tiny moments, but there's only certain moments that we remember, actually, that come to define us. And it doesn't even matter whether they're true or not. These are your memories, right? So you think, you tell your friends or yourself or whoever it is, oh, I'm like this because my mother said this when I was, my mother said I was always going to have fat thighs. And so, whatever it is, but you remember such specific things. And to me, I've always had this theory that that's a sort of slide carousel, and that we're each given an old-fashioned slide carousel, and that is who we are. And each time you add a slide to that, that's your own becoming. And so for me, the 24 hours, that's explaining to, it's living out her life in real time in both cases, in 24 hours and over 50 years. And what I hope is that taking that journey with her, with Elle, that you guys would come to really understand her in the way that she understands and misunderstands herself, because we're with her. It's told, it's contemporary, it's not her flashbacks. So the idea of experiencing her life with her, and then how does she end up at this precipice? And you totally understand that, right, by the time you get back to the precipice. So that was really interesting to me to do it that way structurally.
Yeah, and it was amazing too, especially the beginning. There's a lot of mystery set, you're still not really sure how she found herself in this predicament, and slowly but surely you almost find yourself in the same predicament. You're like, wow, it's
Yeah.
very easy to see how she gets herself there.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, that sort of what you were saying about the mystery, that there is this this question why she's loved Jonas her whole life. It's decades. Why did why did it finally happen last night, right? And actually the 50 years will uncover that mystery, right? So it's like this little emotional mystery that propels you forward, and that I think it's not a who done it, but it's like a why done it, right? And and that fascinated me, to follow her life. I didn't really lead it. It sort of came to me as I followed her along, and it was really I wanted a strong female woman who just, as I say, feels absolutely flawed and fantastic at the same time, I suppose.
Yes. Did you know before you wrote the book what the reason was going to be that they could not be together? Or is that something that came later on as you were just following Elle's story?
It came completely later on. I had no outline and I didn't know what was going to happen. I just had this idea of these two lives. And I think what I didn't mention earlier was that, so I was very obsessed with a John Lennon quote when I was a kid: life is what happens when you are making other plans. And I wrote it in my journals, and I wrote in the next journal, and the next journal, and the next journal. And I sort of got to a certain very rather old adult age and realized I'm still doing that. I'm still thinking forward or thinking backward. I'm not, this is what's happened, right? This is my life. And so to me, that was sort of the structure that I began with. The life that's been in her head, which is the 24 hours, finally is available to her. The dream in her life that she always fantasized about, this man, and then her actual life that's happened, in theory, while she's making other plans, right? And so I wanted to sort of have those two lives bump up against each other.
Well, it's truly incredible to me that you were able to come up with this true reason why they could not be together. Like they couldn't, they were accomplices. They can't be together. And so I can't even believe that came just along the way. But I think that maybe that's the way that we all should be living. Then we can all come up with great ideas like this. Um, so even though it's a story primarily about marriage and romance and partnership, some of the most important moments, some of the most important relationships in this novel are the ones between parents and children. How do you think about these relationships and the importance of including them in the larger story?
So that's interesting. I feel like, of course, the novel is about a choice between two men, but it's equally about the women. It's equally about the choices that Elle has inherited. That the trauma that her grandmother Nanette went through determined Nanette's behavior to Wallace, which determined who Wallace became, and that determines how Wallace acts toward Elle. And so that sort of trickle down really fascinates me. And the way that, for instance, if Wallace develops as a person who really doesn't want to sort of put importance on things. That's her armor. And so she says, right? She says, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. Divorce is good for children." She's always saying these things that are super dismissive, because that's what she's needed to do for herself, her own survival mechanism. But then you ask, well, if that hadn't happened, would Elle have been able to go to Wallace in a different way? Would she have had a different relationship with her mother? Could things have gone a different way? And so it's always those, as we were saying earlier, you were saying, not pre-deciding things. I think that's truly how we live our lives. That life is what happens when you're making other plans, is you're not deciding. And Elle's not deciding, but she's inherited a mother who inherited something from her mother, and so on. And so those relationships are really interesting to me. And of course, then Anna and Elle. I love the sisters.
Wallace saying that divorce is good for children gives big Lucille Bluth energy from Arrested Development. Like, it's good for children. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Um, so what do you think about the balance of light and dark or tragedy and romance in this story? What was kind of like the inspiration behind that? Like, how did you balance the two?
That's such a good question. I think because, you know, there it might be seem dismissive, for instance, to have a moment of humor in the worst moment or the worst moment of tragedy. But I believe that um, human beings don't um, behave as they are expected to behave, and light bumps up against dark all the time, and you use humor in the worst situations, and you exaggerate and have sort of darkness often in humor, right? And I also think kind of what is important might not be the thing that's obvious. So there's a moment in the boat with Elle and Jonas before she tells him, and she's weeping and weeping, and he offers her a peppermint patty, and she goes no no no, and she's about to fall apart, and he says, what, you don't like mint, and it makes her laugh, and that to me is so important in those characters, is that they maintain their sense of humor throughout, even in, I mean, not in every very dark moment, obviously, but that um, they they act like they are real people to me. Let's put it that way. Ella is real, Wallace is real, Anna is real. So, yeah.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, they're going through some things that are truly traumatic, but at the same time, they're vacationing in Cape Cod, which is one of the best places you can vacation in all of America. So they're still going to have a good time, even when really, really bad things are happening.
Right, right.
So before we go to audience questions, would you like to read an excerpt from the book?
Sure. Is there one that you have in mind?
I loved the one where she's talking right before she decides to make her official decision and she wants to live her family life as normal for just one moment. Do you have that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about where they're about to go to the barbecue and they're walking to the barbecue. That's
Yeah.
the where we are. Right. I mean, I'm assuming most people have hopefully read it, and if they haven't, they'll want to. The timestamp is 6:45, and I'll just read from that section. They're on their way to Dixon's barbecue, and she has just made the decision she's just made the decision that she's going to stay with Peter, but she just needs to hold on to that. So it's so hard to hold on to it, to hook into it. 6:45 p.m. We walk up our steep driveway, stop at the dirt road, wait for Mum at the triangle. Don't wait for me, she yells from halfway up the driveway. But we wait. I watch my mother's slow progress. Her knees aren't what they once were. She's wearing her same old jeans, slightly too short, slightly too wide, and a cotton Indian shirt that covers her behind, as she likes to say. The pond frames her ascent, a glass blue horizon line, waist height behind a fretwork of trees. I swat at my ankle. I'm being bitten alive by black flies. A horsefly lands on my arm, its quail-speckled wings settle. Who has the bug spray? Peter reaches into a canvas bag. Here I am, my mother announces. The flies are back, and I'm glad you decided to come with us, Eleanor, though I wish you'd put your hair back. It looks so much nicer when it's out of your face. We're coming up to the Gunther's house when my mother stops. Oh, for heaven's sakes, Mum says, I forgot the red onion. Jack can run back, Peter says. It'll take 5 minutes. Why am I always the one who has to do everything, Jack grouses. Why can't Maddie or Finn go? I can see the muscle in Peter's jaw clenching. It's fine, I'll go. I start back without waiting for Peter to contradict me. I know every fucking family is unhappy in its own fucking way, but right now, for a few hours, I need happy family until I'm safely on shore. I need to hold onto this truth like a life preserver, not let go. Can you grab me a sweater? Peter calls after me. It's going to get chilly. A white cat I've never seen before is sitting on the deck outside the screen porch. There's something about a white cat that revolts me, a rat-like porny quality. The cat disappears into the bushes when it sees me coming. The bottom half of a chipmunk lies on the deck, its furry tail dangling between the wooden slats. I leave it there and go to our cabin to grab Peter's sweater. My jewelry box is out on the bureau top. Odd, because I know I didn't leave it there. I opened to check if something's missing. Nothing has been taken, but something has been added. A piece of folded paper atop my tangle of earrings. It's been cut in the shape of a snapping turtle, and inside is my green glass ring. Jonas has had it all these years, since we stumbled back into each other in the Greek coffee shop. I wonder where he's kept it, hidden away. It's such a small thing, a worthless tin thing, its guilt long gone, and yet when I put it on my finger, I feel a powerful sense of completion, as if I have finally been made whole, restored, like a Venus de Milo whose missing arm has been found, trapped under the earth for centuries, and at last reattached. I close my eyes, allowing myself this at least. I remember the moment he gave it to me, his clammy, shaking hand, saying goodbye, two children who would always love each other. I stick the ring in my pocket, crumple the paper turtle, toss it into the wastebasket, and grab Peter a sweater.
I love it. I think I picked the right passage. I think that's a really powerful one. And you have an amazing reading voice. Oh, wow. So we have some audience questions. The first is from Linda Lee Stallman Volmert. Did Elle always swim without her wedding ring? If not, what does leaving it on the step at the end mean?
All I will say is that Elle never takes off her wedding ring when she swims or any of her jewelry.
Ooh, that's the next.
And thanks for that question, Linda.
That's a good one. Adds a little bit of dimension. So the next question is coming from Gabby Rivera Malo, who I actually know. Hi, Gabby. What is the meaning behind writing one of Ellie's present day moments immediately followed by a flashback either to her past or of her mom's past? I think we kind of answered that, but if you wanted to add.
I mean, I would only say that they're not flashbacks. And so it's sort of it's two ways of telling one character's life. And they're interspersed, and they sometimes are related, but often they're not, because we're telling her story, and her story is moving forward over hours and then over years. And I think that's really the important piece of it.
I think so too. This question is coming from Jessica Taub Rosenberg. Everyone has very long names today. I loved when Rosemary told Elle she thought of her and Anna, she thought her and Anna hated each other. It was so powerful when Elle flatly refused it. Do you have sisters, or did you base this moment on sisters you knew in real life?
I have many, many sisters.
Many sisters?
Yes, partly because my family is a family of divorce and remarriage, but we're all incredibly close. There are 5 of us, 5 sisters. So yes, I know sisters well. I'm also not the oldest, so I also know older sisters really well, and how they can be horrible to you when you're little, but then you become the same age and they become your heart and your soul and your rock. And that's what I really wanted with Anna and Elle, was not to have it be like, oh, we're besties from the beginning, or Anna's horrible, but to follow, Anna's teenagerness in contrast to Elle, and then how close they become.
There is nobody crueler than a sister, but there is also no better friend than a sister.
Exactly.
I'm one of 3 girls, so I'm also the oldest. So I think I speak about myself as well as for my siblings when I say that. You definitely did sibling dynamics very, very well. They're never always just best friends. So this question is coming from Julianne Knapp. The ending seems like the beginning of a second story. Do you plan on a sequel?
I do not plan on a sequel. Although I think you're right that just as life goes on, choices go on, everyday things change, and in a way, if there's any real ambiguity or sort of dangling participle at the end of the novel, to me, that's what it is, that you make one choice, but you might choose something else a year later. I'm not going to, write that book. Well, you never know. But it is not my intention to do that. But
No, I love that it wasn't wrapped up in a bow, because that's the reality of life, is that it isn't usually wrapped up into a pleasant little ending that, and
Exactly.
everything's over after that.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
definitely room for life afterwards, if you will. So this question is coming from Katie Cost, or Coast, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. What was the hardest scene to write in the Paper Palace, and why?
Wow, that's a really good question and a hard one. Thank you, Katie. Hardest scene to write. Hardest scene to write was the rape scene. Very, very, yes, really, really difficult to write, and took me a long time to be able to kind of get there and to try to, survive it in a way, because you're so inside the character that I felt like I was going through it with her, and that was really difficult for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very clear that you put everything of all of yourself into this book. And so to allow yourself to write from Elle's perspective, you have to really let yourself get deep into the character, and it can be hard to get yourself into a super dark place voluntarily.
Yeah, yeah, that was hard. Yeah.
So this question is coming from Alex Garcia. Which character from the book is your favorite, and why?
Huh. Hi, Alex. I guess, I mean, I love them all, but I would have to say Wallace. She just is so awful, but so great. And the arc of her journey over the 24 hours, where she ends up at that end of that night with Elle, sort of saying there are some swims, you do regret, but you won't know unless you take them. The way she sort of opens her heart and gives Elle permission to do whatever Elle is going to do, despite what a judgmental cow she can be. um, she's such a complicated woman, Wallace, and so much of what she appears to be on the surface is hiding her complexity and her heart.
Well, that's why I think it was so important that you showed us some of Wallace's story as well, because then we understood her a little bit more and why she could be so casually cruel, if you will. It made a lot more sense when you knew Wallace more as a person. So this question comes from Erin Miles. Can you talk a bit about the cover? What was the inspiration behind the cover art? If you had any input, I know a lot of times authors don't have any input, but if you did, was this how you wanted the cover to be designed for the Paper Palace?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I was very involved, and it took us a bunch of swings and misses to get there. The cover is actually a painting of the pond that I grew up on.
No way. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's painted by the artist Paul Resica, who is my stepfather, in fact, but he was 93 and a rather well-known painter in the States. And he, we grew up with him painting the pond, painting that landscape wherever we went, whether it was we were on the Cape or whether we were in Mexico or France, like we'd have to follow him because he was, it was always the landscape. And so we looked at a bunch at Riverhead of different paintings of his and thought we'd found one. And then the art director who, for the cover art suddenly found this painting, and I'd never seen it. My mother had never seen it. It's a really old painting of his that had been bought at an auction. She just found this image, and it was that moment of like perfection, right? From my point of view, I love the cover so much. And it, the fact that he didn't, I mean, he went, oh yeah, like it's a really amazing synchronicity, and I love the cover.
I never usually ask authors about their covers because so rarely do they have any input in them whatsoever. So to hear that you had not only so much input, but that it's such a special thing is really cool and very unique.
But also my favorite part is that, in the end I hadn't, it didn't come from me. I love that image it wasn't like anything I'd suggested. I mean, we'd gone through other bits of cover art, and I said, but just so my stepfather is a very well-known painter and has painted on the Cape for many, many years and in the museums there and blah, blah, blah. And then they just sort of took it from me. And so it was really nice to have a piece of it. Obviously, in the end, the author does not decide anything, but I'm really happy. And he's an amazing artist. And yeah, I encourage her. There's so many beautiful paintings of that area. And yeah, so.
That's a very special story. Thank you for asking, Erin.
Yeah.
This question comes from Laura Rizzoli. How long did it take you to write this novel? And what kind of research did you do that might surprise us for this book?
I didn't do any research at all, I don't think. I had to do some corrections of little details. Like very strange little things, or to do with timetables of trains, let's say in the 1960s. Or actually, yeah, what I did need to do was figure out what music, what concerts were happening, what people were listening to, what films came out, what was on television. So yeah, in terms of the sort of the truth of all those details, those were researched. I'm sorry, I've completely blanked on the first part of that question.
It's okay. How long did it take you to write the paper palace?
That's why I blanked, because it took so long, it's embarrassing. It took me a long time, but I wasn't writing full time. I was writing sort of in between or all summer, but then I wouldn't be able to write in the fall. I'd be working on a different kind of a project. And so, yeah, it did take me a long time, but probably 5 or 6 years all told.
Luckily for you, it's a timeless story. So you didn't have to rewrite anything to make it super time sensitive or anything like that. But I think that's honestly more inspirational for people to hear that something took you 5 years, because a lot of people have the dream of writing their debut novel and they know that they can't do it in 1. So maybe 5, maybe we can all do it.
Sure. Well, I think it's so, for anybody who does want to write, the thing that I learned over doing this for the first time was that there's no such thing, there's no definition of a sort of real writer or the way a real writer does it. I went in a way thinking that, and thinking, oh, well, but I have no idea, I have no outline, I write it hither and yon, I can't be a real writer. And then I saw this El Doctorow quote that said, for him, writing was like driving in the fog at night. You can only see as far as your headlights will show you, but you can make your entire journey that way. And I thought, well, that's what I did. And, everybody does it differently.
Absolutely. I interviewed Angeline Bully, who wrote The Firekeeper's Daughter, and took her 12 years to write that book. So you're killing it. And I think it was a Barnes Noble pick. The next question comes from Margie Mall, and she wants to know how you came up with the name for this book.
Oh, I love that question too. Hi, Margie. The Paper Palace is actually a building that exists that my grandfather built. It's not anything to do with this, where the novel is set, or the camp. It was actually a very big white modernist building on some far dune. I don't even think I've ever seen it. This would have been in the 40s maybe. And it was square and white, like a piece of paper. And so people called it the Paper Palace. I don't know why. And I just always loved that phrase. And as I began to feel and see who Elle was, I realized that she and this camp, which obviously has a different Paper Palace meaning, that the sort of, that they are each other, and that, like, because it's made of cardboard and little bits of paper pressed together, that she's the same way, that she has always felt, that she's made up of all these little pieces, and we've seen them. But like the Paper Palace, that means she's still strong enough to be standing and to have like that camp that's gone through hurricanes, that I think she's a metaphor for it, and it's a metaphor for her.
I love that. Like, against it all, despite everything hard happening, still surviving, still standing.
Yeah.
I like that. The next question comes from Catherine Ellsworth, and she wants to know, how much of the novel did you actually write while on the Cape, and whether or not that influenced the book's progress?
Hi, Catherine. I wrote a lot of it on the Cape in the summers. Not at the camp. That's not where I live. But there's an old barn and I work up there on where we live on the Cape, and it was absolutely very inspiring. And in fact, exactly that I would go for the summer and I would feel that I could just concentrate on the book instead of kids and school and whatever else was happening or other projects, and just really be in it. So that I found, very, very inspirational. And I probably wrote a lot of it here.
Nobody asked, but I'm curious. Are you more of an ocean person or a lake person?
Well, in what sense? Swimming or I mean, I'm not an interior lake person in terms of I'm a coastal person.
Like, what brings you more peace?
Looking at the ocean and swimming in the ponds. There's all these great whites now. You probably know, since you're from around here, they've infested Cape Cod, which is completely crazy and wasn't there when I was a child at all.
Yeah,
swimming. I was actually in the water. I was in the ocean talking to a friend on Saturday, and I looked out and a huge great white blackfin came up directly in front of us. I mean, quite far out, but clearly had stopped and went back under and then came back up, and I just backed out of the water. So look at the ocean, swim in the ponds.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was pretty intense.
I need to watch out. I was in the ocean on Saturday too. Gotta be careful. So Gina Murphy wants to know if you have any rituals that you do while writing.
Hi, Gina. I do. I'm a ritual person in terms of that. Yeah, I do. I have, I probably won't withdraw them, but I always meditate before I start writing. And I always, there's a certain, I hate smelly candles and stuff, but there's this one kind of incense that I got in Japan in Kyoto at a temple. And for whatever reason, it reminds me of a moment where I was really inspired with the book. And so I'll just light that and then get going. But I have to do those little rituals. And I line things up. I have totems that I have, certain, little things I've picked up along the way when I had solved a huge problem with the book, or something from a forest when I was, walking, thinking. So yeah, a little superstitious.
Cool. I'm really superstitious too, so I can relate. So the next question is coming from Jenna Alstad, and she wants to know if you'll speak to the meaning of the feather.
Yeah, sure. The feather is from the hummingbird. So the night during the storm, you might remember there's this huge storm and there's a hummingbird that's caught in it. And sort of bird maelstrom, and she tries to wake Peter up to show him, but he's tired, fair enough. But in that moment, she remembers this moment from years ago with Jonas, where they stopped at this tree that was completely covered in honeysuckle and hummingbirds, and he, how Jonas is very sort of scientific, he knows all these facts, he's sort of a nerdy kid in a way, and he tells her, that hummingbirds are the only birds that can fly backwards and forwards at the same speed, and very, very fast as well, but with intention. And in this storm, the hummingbird that she sees is flying backward to get to safety. And in the morning when she goes outside, she sees one of its feathers on the step. And beyond that, you'll have to interpret.
Thank you. So the next question comes from Cindy Pacino, and she wants to know, will you continue to write, novels, or will you go back to working on TV, HBO? She wants to know. She wants you to write more. That's her specific request.
Cindy, was it Cindy?
Cindy.
Cindy.
Yeah, Cindy.
Hi. Hi. I am definitely going to continue to write novels. I have never written for television before. And by the way, the sort of HBO piece of my life was quite a long time ago, although I've done producing since then. But what I am doing right now is I'm writing the miniseries for HBO of The Paper Palace. I know. So hopefully that'll happen. It's a very huge learning curve for me because I've always been on the criticism side of the script, the development side, and now I'm having to do it myself. But it's an amazing team there, and not the team I grew up with, so to speak. It's been a long time, and then get back to poetry, and then through poetry, I hope to get back to. I will get back to novels, but I was a poet before I was writing fiction.
That's why you're so good at reading out loud.
No.
You're a poet. That makes perfect sense. You read out loud like a poet, so it makes sense. Well, I can't wait to read your poetry. I'm gonna go make a mental note of that. So then this question comes from Nancy Wilson, and I think this might be our last question as it is 3:45. She wants to know, what do you like about being an author, and did someone in your life inspire you to become an author?
I'm incredibly proud to have accomplished this. Absolutely. I come from a literary family. My father and grandfather are both editors and writers. My sister-in-law is a novelist. My grandfather was a literary critic and poet, and he wrote many books, but he was sort of known for, he sort of put William Faulkner on the map, and Jack Kerouac. He discovered both of them in a way. When I asked him for advice, and I think this is in the sort of end of the credits of the book, but when I asked him for advice, he said every good novel has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, with the end foreshadowed in the beginning. And then they have to be well written. But it was so funny because years later, without really thinking it through, I actually started my book at the end. So I did exactly what he told me to do. So having accomplished it is the biggest thing of my life besides having my kids, of course. And I'm enormously proud, actually.
Congratulations on everything. Congratulations on being a New York Times bestselling author. What a thrill, and well-deserved. Thank you all so much for attending this event. Just as a reminder, the Paper Palace is available at all Barnes & Noble stores. They may be low on it, like my Barnes & Noble though, because it's flying off the shelves. So maybe call ahead. And it is available 24/7 on barnesandnoble.com. Thank you so much, Miranda, for joining us today.
Mackenzie, thank you. And thank you, Barnes & Noble, obviously. And all you guys who've joined, thank you, all the readers. You're the ones who make this book meaningful to me, so.
Well, I can't wait to see what you do next, and I hope we can stay in touch.
I hope so too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Have a great day.